A prime example of why the first rule of IT is CYA and document everything, by users Petty 23. A few years ago one of the tasks I was working on was converting network drives to SharePoint shared files. If you don't know how these work, you log into the relevant SharePoint, go to the Documents section, click the Sync button and it adds it to your Windows Explorer. From there you can treat it basically like any other folder. What we would do is pre-sync the files, and overnight do the actual cutover, so there is minimal chance of people working on files at the cutover time. There was one particular drive I was converting that was related to finance. I reach out to the owner of that network drive over MS Teams, explain what I plan to do, and ask if they can advise who should have access to the SharePoint when the files are moved over. I can't remember the exact wording, but the reply over Teams came across as everyone who has access to the network drive should have access to the SharePoint, and that part should be obvious to me. I confirm via Teams that I will cut over the files overnight on a specific date. Everyone who currently has access to the network drive will have access to the SharePoint, and I will send out an email to these people how they sync to the SharePoint. I then copy/paste the Teams conversation into the ticket, perform the cutover, as agreed, overnight on the night, and send out an email to all relevant users explaining how they sync to the SharePoint. The next morning, an email with the high priority flag gets sent from the aforementioned owner of the network drive to me, the CIO, CTO, CFO, my manager, the help desk manager, the finance manager, basically everyone short of the Queen of England. The email says that lots of staff have access to confidential information they should not have access to, and straight up blamed me for it. Before I had even read the email, the CIO has already done a reply all. He has looked up the ticket, seen the Teams message I copy-pasted into the ticket, and showed said MS Teams conversation. He stated that I was requested to copy over permissions by that person, which is exactly what I did. That is the reason that these people have access to the confidential information. It's amazing how fast the email chain changed from "why did this happen?" to "how can we fix this?" To save this turning into a 70-page novel, what had happened is although a lot of people had access to the drive, not everyone had it mapped as a letter, or even knew they had access. An emergency review was done on who should have access and the access list amended accordingly. Getting confirmation on what was being done and documenting it saved me that day from being thrown under a bus, and also demonstrated that day that the CIO had our backs. Bricking 10 servers, by user mother_distance_4714. This is from the old days when I was working for the on-site service of a big PC/server company. I was responsible for the on-site service in my region. It was a dark Friday night in September and I had just lit a nice fire in my fireplace, had a nice hot chocolate and a book when my phone rang. I needed to head to a client now as all of his 10 servers were out and the hotline could not find out why and what to do. As I arrived I could confirm that indeed all 10 servers were dead. Like no light no nothing. The IT guy was a middle-aged electrical engineer who was very upset and quite angry, and so it took me a little time to find out what happened. Very long story short. The guy thought it was a good idea to do some firmware updates via the IDRAC while noon was there that could complain about the servers rebooting. That is indeed a valid reason to do this on all servers at once on a Friday evening. So he clicked on update all and went to do other stuff. Then he did a little more. And then he did something else. He told me all he did in excruciating detail. Nothing he did had anything to do with the servers, but he could not be stopped. As the servers were still updating he then went out to have a smoke. As he returned the servers were offline and he was not able to connect to the devices. So he obviously did, what any responsible user would do, he tried to power cycle the devices. Each and every one of the poor things. The hard way by cutting the power to the enclosure. This was the exact moment he learned that power supplies have a BIOS too. He also learned that this BIOS can be updated. He learned that when this happens, everything else shuts down. He learned that an update on a PSU is a very slow thing. And he learned that cutting the power to a PSU that is updating instantly kills the poor little thing. Well, I ordered 20 new PSUs. Installing them revived all servers. Don't complain your issue isn't fixed if you don't ask for it to be fixed, by user Hungry Cheek 3994. This story takes place a few years ago, I want to say 2018-2019-ish. Anyway, we had this user at work. She was the oldest employee there and we used to joke that they built the walls around her because she literally saw the construction begin. She was also absolutely abysmal at everything, even remotely technical, like one day she told me her computer was laggy when it was just her mouse that had stopped working. A new mouse and the computer wasn't lagging anymore. So one day she calls me, saying that the fax machine didn't work and she needed it because a lot of important people used fax to send us information. Again, this was in 2018 to 2019, so, sure lady, whatever you say. I grab one of my colleague who is more competent in phones and faxes than I am and we go see what's all about. We discover that the fax is unplugged, as in, the power cord is not connected to the outlet, so it stands to reason the fax wouldn't work without energy. We plug it back in, and when the fax comes back to life, it starts making a lot of unusual noise, think along the lines of annoying beeps and such. Hearing that, the user exclaimed, "Oh yes, I remember. I unplugged the fax last month before I went on holidays because it was making so much noise." So you're telling us the fax hasn't been working properly for more than a month and you didn't notify tech support because why exactly? We ended up solving the issue and the user got a little warning to call tech support if she had trouble with her equipment and not unplug them by her own volition. Sometimes I have to actively remind myself that I actually like my job. The golden rule of IT, cover your assets, by Useroing Kai Confidence. Reading a prime example of why the first rule of IT is CYA and document everything made me recall an incident a few years ago where CYA became key. This was around 2012. I worked for what would become an MSP, handling IT for a growing org since the mid-2000s, without a contract, as this predated the modern MSP concept. This would matter later. The CFO, Brett, fake name, started off as an accountant but shoehorned his way up to becoming CFO, and inserted himself into IT, despite knowing nothing about tech. We've all heard this before. The CEO, in contrast, was approachable and level-headed. IT progress was slow, but functional. Most of the time we worked okay together, things just took time to get done. Around 2018, Brett left the org. For 18 months, work with our new contact person Tad, who was later in his career, competent, and ego-free, moved quickly. We modernized infra, tightened security, and actually made progress. By this time our MSP had evolved into actual MSP, with new customers signing contracts and developing more standardized practices, while we tried to get legacy customers to convert over too. In 2020 however, one Friday night out of the blue Brett texts me, "I'm back." Great. Soon after, while not sharing much about the 18 months he was away, he announced plans for an IT audit by another firm. I asked for details. He revealed their scope and said they offer service contracts, which he was interested in. I notified him we offer service contracts now too and had for several years by this point. He had just ignored it. No response. 6 months later, in late 2020 the audit, mostly remote, and by the way it took way too long, concluded, and, shockingly, everything was in perfect shape. We'd recently enabled MFA on all accounts and other now basic ideas when the pandemic hit and when workers turned remote. Turns out, the auditors were just another MSP hoping to steal the account. Brett forwarded their quote to me and the CEO, asking for approval. Again, I reminded him we also offer contracts. His response? "Well, why didn't you tell me before?" I attached the email proving I had. The CEO reprimanded him, but not much else happened. Brett, naturally, stayed on, never apologized, and wasted everyone's time and money. The other MSP's auditors were frustrated at the wasted time and wild goose chase. Moral of the story? Document everything in IT. Also, perhaps more importantly, don't overlook the natural leaders within an org, like Tad, who can be real assets to the organization and to the MSP. How a not printing printer turned into a mess to reset a password, by user Hunafixit. I'm not formal IT. I work mostly with seniors doing small stuff like installing a printer or teaching them how to use a tablet. I was in the building for the memorial of a customer that I had grown quite close to. Another story I'll link at the end. I was helping the daughter of the customer/friend with setting up for the memorial. The lady she was staying with said she was having trouble with her printer and wanted to hire me. I agreed and made arrangements to do the work. She says that it simply won't print. In my mind I'm already running through the obvious things: plugged in, turned on, connected to the computer, drivers installed. When I get there, I discover, it's a Mac. I'm much more a PC guy, but with the help of Google I know enough about Macs to navigate to what I need. The obvious all checks out, even the drivers are installed. I check connected devices and the printer shows up. I try to print a test page, I get an error about a paper jam. I check it all out and no jam. So I try again, this time nothing, No errors, no status, nothing happens on the printer. I check the queue and nothing. So I download the drivers and prepare to reinstall. The system wants a password. She doesn't know it. It was her husband's computer and he had passed away. She had a page of notes he had made and I tried all the passwords there and nothing. I Google how to reset the password, and reboot into recovery mode. It wants the old password to reset. We try again and are getting nowhere. It turns out there are 3 users listed, him, her and admin. The problem is that the Apple account ID is linked to his email address. He was a retired professor at the local university and the university had gotten rid of all the retirees' accounts about a year ago. So we couldn't access the email. So I've hit the limit of my knowledge and don't want to waste her time spinning wheels going nowhere. So I decided it was time to talk to the experts. I called Apple support and was surprised. I didn't have to navigate through phone menu hell, I didn't have to speak to someone who was just going off a script but had no idea. I got a real person within 2 minutes and she was very knowledgeable. Turns out the macOS version dates back to 2017. She said that's going to make it more time consuming. So we go through a whole bunch of don't have access to this account and we're currently waiting for them to send her a new password. At which time I can finally get back to that troublesome printer. After some much needed updates of course. The things I do for $30/HR. Luckily I love it and I meet some really interesting people along the way. TLDR, a printer not working turns into trying to change the password and waiting a week for the new password. As promised, here's a link to my other story about a sweet old lady that became a friend. No charge? Nonsense.